Welcome to the IT Collab. This is Brandon Barnes and Nathan Taylor here to guide you through the next level of nerdiness or technology. Today we are going to talk about the CrowdStrike, or I think the news said Microsoft outage, right?
Yes.
So unfair. People are calling me and say, "Oh, well, how are you affected?" I'm like, "I'm not. I don't use CrowdStrike."
Well,
So, Nathan, could you explain just to everyone today? It's kind of a short episode, but like, could you explain what happened?
yeah, and it's interesting. The reason it got called a Microsoft outage, there's two variables there. One is Microsoft had an Azure outage in the central US region that evening, right before it. So there was some correlation that had no connection, but it kind of started. I think these reporters are just trying to grasp at what's going on, and it's impacting only Microsoft machines because it was only a Microsoft update. So there was some correlation there, but it definitely was a CrowdStrike issue. So CrowdStrike is one of the more popular and more well-known EDR vendors. They're a security vendor. Think of it as next generation antivirus. It's really top of the line endpoint security. And so,
So, is that what you mean by EPR or EPS or what do you call them? Top,
EDR.
just for just ER. Okay, what
EDR
is that?
stands for extended detection and response. This is security products is this acronym soup these days of, antivirus and EDR and XDR, MDR, and like it gets confusing. The reality is
I
this
just
is
I just want to make sure we break it down for our
yeah,
listeners, right?
absolutely. I have trouble keeping up sometimes. This is one of the top endpoint security products out there. It's got a very good reputation. It's running on a lot of high-end systems. It's definitely a more expensive top of the line solution, but it's supposed to be really good. It's got a really good reputation in the space. And so that's why it was running on a lot of airports and airlines and big train systems and big companies and big things that are infrastructure related because it has that reputation as a really good choice for high-end enterprises. So they released a patch that had they released a patch on, what was it, Friday morning. So for the US, we actually dodged a lot of this bullet to some level because it hit early in the morning and a lot of people had a chance to get ahead of it, whereas in Europe it hit middle of the day. And they
Oh
released the
man.
patch. And in that patch, the way antivirus solutions work is they actually put drivers into the operating system and start to integrate into Windows at a really deep level because they're trying to be deeper in the OS than that virus is. You get some malware. The advantage is if I can be deeper in the operating system, then I can kind of come underneath that virus and remove it. I can stay ahead of it because that virus is trying to take over control of that machine, that malware. And so they have all these plugins to the kernel. The kernel is the core piece of software that the operating system runs on, the Windows kernel. And so they have a kernel driver that plugs them in, and this hits early in the boot cycle that this kernel driver runs to say, yep, whatever CrowdStrike needs to do on this OS at a deep, deep level, I'm allowing it because it's got its access, its fingers into the kernel. And so they released a patch for that. And that patch was malformed. It was a malformed driver. They had a bug in their driver code. Um, and they're blaming it on their testing process, which is absolutely correct, right? They're saying, hey, our testing process tested this, said it was fine, but it wasn't. We had a bug in our testing process. We can circle back to that. But either way, they released a faulty bug. And here's what happened is that bug then, as part of that update, hey, reboot your machine. And if you rebooted your machine or it pushed a reboot, when it tried to load the OS and hit the kernel would call that driver. That driver was buggy and it would crash the screen. You get a classic blue screen of death. We always remember the big blue screens of death in Times Square or maybe on your Windows 98 machine. They still exist. It just basically means that Windows couldn't boot. And so this driver was causing a blue screen of death and you could not boot your machines. And this impacted basically every Windows machine with CrowdStrike on it out there before they caught it. And so we're talking servers, workstations, PCs inside of, airline terminal monitors on the wall. I mean, there are so many machines got impacted. Hospitals, all these machines that had CrowdStrike were not able to boot after this update.
Isn't that insane,
It's crazy.
right? And so here we are, like once again, because mean, CrowdStrike does work with Apple.
Sure.
It does work with other, operating
Linux. Yep.
systems, but for some reason it was a driver on Microsoft, therefore being labeled as a Microsoft issue,
Yeah.
right?
It was crazy.
And how many people do you think it affected?
Oh, hundreds of millions. I mean, it impacted so many people. I was in the airport on Sunday, and this happened on
Man,
Friday and Sunday for an airline, Southwest, that didn't get impacted. The airport was nuts. It was still nuts for everybody because they were still the ripple effects of a full day of thrown off and canceled flights last for weeks. You know, all the flights that get diverted, the flights that are now full, people still trying to get home, people who didn't get to go on their honeymoons. I mean, the impact was extensive, you know, between hospitals and trains and airlines and you name it. It was a big impact. And part of the challenge was recovering it from this one is not easy. You know, we tend to work in a world where we have remote access tools, right? So, oh, somebody pushed a buggy piece of software. Let's just run a script to reinstall the non-buggy version, right? That's how we live in this world. So we solve a lot of problems. Let's script it. Let's run a little, push a new update, and everything will be okay again. Um, because this update kept the operating system from booting, you can't remotely push a solution to that. There's no way to say, hey, I'm gonna go push an update for it. So
yeah, I mean, if the machines can't boot, therefore you can't do the things,
yes,
to update the system. So that's unfortunate. What so how could you what would you do to recommend to, listeners, like, how to fix this? How could you prevent this? What can you do?
yeah. So CrowdStrike put out instructions, and pretty quickly the internet had the instructions. There was two main solutions. One of them was really kind of funny. If you rebooted 15 to 20 times, you probably were going to get back in. And the reason was the way that OS boots, if it booted up long enough before it crashed for CrowdStrike to go talk to the servers, it would download an updated
Yeah,
driver and get you in. And that happened. I saw articles of people
that's
bidding,
startup.
doing 15, 20, 30, 40 reboots, and eventually they'd get back in. And, that's incredible that worked for some people. Um, it works great for grandma at home trying to reboot her machine on her desk, right? That's great. That's a lot harder for a machine in a kiosk or a server. And crashing a machine over and over like a server, it's not really a good choice in life because you can corrupt data, you can corrupt
No,
OS. It's just risky.
right.
But it was a good workaround for people who are like, hey, my laptop is down and I got to work today. Okay, we'll keep rebooting it until it works. The alternative was to boot into safe mode. So Windows has this mode where it runs a really limited set of features called safe mode, and it's built for this sort of scenario, right? You've got you don't load drivers in safe mode. It loads a lot less drivers. It's really bare bones Windows, and it allows you to bypass these problems. So you could boot into safe mode, and then you could go delete the folder with the faulty driver. There were instructions on how to do that. And so that was the main way people solved this, is they booted into safe mode. There were a couple challenges with that, though. One is that if you're running a disk encryption tool like BitLocker, in order to get into safe mode, you have to manually put in like a 50 character decryption key. And you need to have access to that key. So you got to go find that key, you got to go type that in, and then you get in, and then you delete the driver, and then you get back. Well, think about doing that with a remote user on their laptop that's not very technical. You've got to talk them through getting into safe mode. You've got to read a long code over the phone to them, and then hope that they type it in correctly, and then walk them through finding the right directory, deleting the right file, and then rebooting, and hopefully everything works. This is a challenging scenario. Um, servers
100%.
servers can be difficult. Getting into safe mode on servers, especially if they're running in Azure or AWS, there's not really access to safe mode because they're running in a virtual environment. So you have to then do it over a console setup. Well, not all servers are set up properly to run console in the cloud. There are some companies that are just having a rough day, a rough week, where they're having to download images of their servers, attach them to other VMs, boot up that other VM, go find that folder, delete it, then reattach that disk back to the server, and then boot it up. There's other ways around it, but it's a brutal chain of difficult choices to get there. So, um, and I think the bigger issue is you think about an airport and you've got 500 kiosk machines running screens on the walls. You got to have somebody with a mouse and a keyboard walk around, go find where that machine is, plug in a mouse and a keyboard, boot it up to safe mode, get through BitLocker, do the safe mode thing, delete the file, then reboot it, and you're back in business. 500 machine, little tiny machines in closets behind walls. That's a long set of days trying to get this fixed. It's a brutal challenge. So,
I like how you said long sets of days because we've been there where we've had to go and work through the night and do the things
yes,
um, to ensure that people are up and running. So I could see IT techs going literally screen to screen, making sure that everything's set up properly
yes.
or rebooted or whatever. I mean that could be quite quite the deal. How much money? I mean, I've heard all kinds of things. I know you don't know this probably, but I want to CrowdStrike on stocks has probably lost a ton of money,
They lost
just based off,
they
right?
lost a good chunk of their value. I mean, it was 10% that day, and I think it's probably continued to go down. I think the bigger is the economic impact to the world of just the broader economic impact. I've seen 20, 30, 40 billion dollars, is the impact of this already. The interest,
Well, you talking they have to pay for or canceled flights, canceled this, canceled that. I mean, people lost money or that systems are down. Okay, so that testing team is probably they probably lost some jobs there.
I I hope there's some real impact. I mean, the reality of this is the challenge of the world we live in. CrowdStrike had let go a lot of their automation testing team, a lot of their quality assurance team, because they'd automated it. Oh, we put systems in, we don't need these people. Let's be more efficient. This is corporate America. We'll deal with it. Hey, can we do this with less people? Let's do that. We've been seeing this with Microsoft for years, right? Microsoft has been putting out buggy updates every 3 or 4 months. And part of it is, they want to move quick. They want to do this agile software development and they try to push stuff quick and automate testing. And then they test in prod. That's just the world we live in, sadly. That's why you got to be careful about those, you know, brand new Apple updates or brand new Windows updates. We oftentimes for our customers go, hey, we got to take a balance of these Windows updates have security holes, patch security holes, but you don't want to be bleeding edge. You don't want to install them in the first couple of hours because every 3 or 4 months you find out that there's some scenario where if you've got the wrong setup, Microsoft's Windows crashing with this new update, and then they release a new update 4 hours later that fixes that bug. It's a challenge. I think the other mistake that CrowdStrike made in this case is CrowdStrike does have some update rings where you can say, hey, I don't want to be bleeding edge. I would like to be on a slower release. And if you're in a hospital, you're going to say, yes, please, I cannot afford to have my machines go down. Put us in the non-bleeding edge ring. Because the way they classified this update, it got released as a signature update as opposed to a software update. And so it skipped all those
Hmm.
rings and everybody got it. Well, you can't put a kernel driver into a signature release. That should be core software. That should be a major version number as a new kernel driver. So there was mistakes made on a couple levels, and that's part of why I didn't like their response. There, oh well, it was our testing process. Our testing had a bug. It's like, no, you made a lot of mistakes here, and I understand you're trying to spin this for your shareholders, but like you could, and then there was a mixture of owning it. Their CEO got on TV and really ate some humble pie and said, hey, we're really sorry. We understand this is really making life hard for a lot of people. I appreciate people who will at least own some of it, but then I think the follow-on response was kind of like, oh well, it wasn't our fault. It was the testing software. It's like, well, you wrote the testing software. You let go of your QA people to save money. You released it in the wrong ring. If you had proper even release rings, good companies are like, yes, we're going to release new software all the time. It's a security vendor. They're releasing signatures every day. They have to be pushing out software all the time, right? So that's part of their flow. There's still a way to say, hey, we're going to hit 100,000 machines and then a million machines and then 100 million machines. You can do that with software. And they didn't have that properly in place. And so by the time they realized they were the cause of this outage, it had already hit hundreds of millions of machines. It really was disruptive. So um, the other interesting thing I saw was the threat actors hopped on this really quick. And
Hmm.
what they went after was they started pretending to be people helping solve the problem. Here, run this super duper quick patch. This will fix your stuff. here, follow these instructions to get your machines back up and running. So they did, instead of like, attacking these machines with broken CrowdStrike or something, or trying some novel, attack against this kernel driver or something, they went after the people and said, hey, you think you've got this figured out? Well, we'll help you solve it quicker. Follow our instructions. And if you weren't paying attention, you're getting an email that says, hey, I'll help you with your CrowdStrike thing. You're a desperate engineer. Yeah, great. I need a quick solution. All of a sudden they're clicking through, and before you know it, you're up a creek without a paddle, because you've now given the threat actor access to your machines, or access to your tenants, a number of things. So it was very social engineering focused in this case. So
Aren't they always?
they're so
I mean,
smart.
when you're going to jump on something like that, yeah, when you're going to jump on something like that, you might as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So Brandon, let me flip tables on you. So here's the question for you. Um,
Yep.
you and I both kind of dodged this bullet because we weren't CrowdStrike focused in our practices. On one of the orgs I work with, we had about a dozen customers on it. We had to work through some stuff, but it was a very small percentage of our user base. Um, but I still think it's a great opportunity to talk through, what does a business do? How, this could be SentinelOne or Defender next time. It's, CrowdStrike made some mistakes. I think CrowdStrike needs some humility in their corporate brand. They're a very proud company. I think they needed some to be knocked down a couple steps. But we're seeing other vendors could make the same mistake. How do you help your customers protect themselves from the next time this happens to whatever vendor that pushes out a buggy update? What are some layers we can put in place here?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think unfortunately every single situation is different.
Sure,
So I can't imagine we didn't have anyone on CrowdStrike personally because we really tout Defender.
sure.
We taught some other things, and I think Microsoft has been doing this quite a long time. Where, yeah, I mean, they push out some updates, but never enough. They'll do like a test batch to people to test and see, like, am I going to blue screen
Yes,
these people up? So I hear what you're saying. I think I have seen a couple cases where something like this possibly, like, update has gone bad, something like that. I don't think you technically can protect against it. I mean, you are at the mercy of. I mean, in this case, or like talking to the only thing that was affected in our realm was a couple customers had their vendors affected.
right,
So
right.
their systems online that they used with their software as a service SaaS providers were affected by this. Therefore, they couldn't do their job because of that.
Yeah,
And other than that, like I guess to prevent, it's an open ended question, right? Like you can't. I don't think you can. I think you can try and get. It really brought to mind some other, like, vet your vendors,
sure,
and make sure you know. And I usually try and trust the vendors that I have. I think that's why I tend to roll the Defender route
sure.
because it is created by Microsoft. It's their stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know. I think just be smart and just buying something because someone says it's pretty or it's the best. Yeah, I would say that's unfortunate. CrowdStrike, because CrowdStrike had a great name
yeah,
coming up in the security ranks over the years, and for that to happen, honestly, I'm shocked. I,
yeah, yeah. I agree.
it just goes to show you exactly what you said is they cut costs, save some money, and what it's going to cost them millions, billion, whatever it's going to cost, millions upon millions
Yeah.
to make it, and they're going to get sued.
Oh yeah.
Like,
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Well, I saw
and it
some.
wasn't security, but
I saw some interesting articles about people who might be hitting their cybersecurity insurance for this because it's cyber related. I'm like, that's fascinating that the vendors are causing the cybersecurity insurance claims. I think it's a great opportunity to talk about business continuity. We used to talk about, hey, do you have a backup solution? And backups are still important. Hey, do my important systems and data, if something goes wrong, can I recover them? And in this case, if you had a server that crashed hard that you couldn't boot and you couldn't solve it, now you're really hoping you have a good backup, right? Um, but in the industry, we've changed the phrase from backup to business continuity and disaster recovery to start to talk through the broader perspective, which is, um, business continuity is this idea that beyond IT, have you as a business thought through how you're going to respond to things you can't control? A cyber attack, your CEO or chief operating person gets run over by a bus, God forbid. Um, a hurricane hits the city where your main set of employees are. How are you going to respond as a business to these scenarios? That's that business continuity. How do we keep the business going in the case of something brutal happening? Okay, the CEO gets run over by a bus. Okay, who else has signing power on the bank accounts? And does there you know, what's the CEO's will say about who takes over the company? That's an important thing for a company to think through. Great, it's you and your wife that run the business, but me as one of the board members, I have to have the conversation. What happens when you guys, the plane you're on your way to Belize crashes? What are we going to do as a business? Have you thought through that? Do your lawyers know what to do? Do we have a succession plan, that sort of thing? And so in this case, it's a conversation of what happens if a lot of your computer systems go down. Do you have ideas of how to get back up and running in a skeleton form? I think really becomes the conversation.
I think that's a great point, right? And out of the gate, I'm thinking of more smaller businesses where if their main line of business app goes out, I have seen it in cases where they do have a failover, right? They know their business continuity has to go. And, in any case, just like this, having a solid backup, because just in the event that does blue screen of death happen on your server, you need to have good backups. Good backups are going to prevent you on having many issues with many security breaches and or issues,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
That is the solid. I think you might lose a couple days worth of business,
Right.
but the truth is, if you're hacked, if you're anything, like, having a good backup is crucial.
Yes.
So I agree with what you're saying there. Having failover apps a little harder when you have like all your contacts here, but
Sure.
I totally know what you're saying, right? I mean, and how do you back up your SaaS applications?
Yeah. So SaaS makes this harder. So I think looking at the world and going, one of the ways to approach this is to go, if my business is down for a day, what does that cost me? Oh, it costs me $2 million a day. Great. Can we spend $100,000 a year building a redundant system of some sort? And what does that look like? Well, I think in this case, there's a couple ways you could have responded. If you've got infrastructure in Azure, say you've got some line of business apps in Azure Site Recovery is really great for a scenario like this because you could have gone, hey, we're failing over to the secondary site and a couple hours before this happens because those servers haven't crashed. Boom, you've got a failover site. All of a sudden, you're up and running very quickly. So, is that an expensive and a difficult solution to build? Yeah, it takes some time and some engineering to get the site recovery built properly. But
Yeah,
in this scenario, if you're going to lose $2 million a day, that time would have paid off. Like, hey, we got our guys up and running in the morning. We can think about it. I think having an AVD config built out or a Windows 365 setup where you're like, hey, your system's down, but on your iPad, you can log into Windows 365 and I can get you going on a machine that boots because you've got a meeting you've got to be on today. You're thinking through, can I get users up and running quickly? I've seen this a lot in the cybersecurity side. I know a vendor that does some really good work where they come into these sites where people get ransomware and the entire business is down and they go, what are you doing? Oh, well, we're down. We're just in trouble. They're like, yeah, but I can spin you up an entire infrastructure in AVD in an hour and your users can be working again. Do I have all your data? Do I have all your apps? No. But the reality is we're information workers now, right? I need email. I need Teams. I probably need a SaaS app, and that SaaS app might not have gone down, probably didn't go down with your ransomware attack. So just thinking through like how quickly can we get you up and running in a secondary environment while we spend the weekend having the nerds fix the primary environment, fix all the endpoints, is a really good process to go through and start to build documents. A lot of these security frameworks have um, disaster recovery documents. Hey, what is your incident response plan? And you take the work, do the time to tabletop out what's the scenario and how would we respond and how quickly could we get through it. This is a great opportunity just to remind us all to say, hey, if your business is, can't afford, a day of downtime to solve a problem, it's worth spending the money to really game out like how could we respond to things. As you mentioned, Brandon, if you've got a bunch of SaaS apps and those go down, there's only so much you can do. 365 goes down, Salesforce goes down, QuickBooks Online goes down. Well, you can't really prevent that. Like at some point, Now, do you want to have a backup of your 365 data? Probably. Thinking through if that data is that critical, do you want it in a third-party backup that's on AWS? Um, there's a lot of solutions out there where you're backing up off the Microsoft Cloud into somewhere else for your 365. That could be critical in those scenarios. So lots of good stuff to think through, and I think this is a great reminder to kind of just start being creative and think through, you know, what is business continuity? What are the things I need to think through? What should my budget be for preparing for those things based on what that cost would be? And I think that can go long ways for customers to really prepare for those scenarios.
100% agree. I think this could 100% or this could really lead us back to the DRBC. I think we've already talked about in the past, or me and when we started this, but I think it's a great topic to have, and what it can really prevent you, because I think it's business owners think, oh, it's too expensive. Yeah, wait, how much is it going to cost you if you don't have it? How
Right.
much could it save you if you just get it done?
Yes.
So
Totally
I
agree.
think that'll be a good episode for next time, Nathan, as we wrapped up this episode. Um, Anything else you want to talk about in the CrowdStrike realm?
Um, I think the final thing is if you know somebody who's working on this, somebody who was deeply impacted, especially on the technology side, go give them a hug and tell them thank you. There's a lot of nerds who lost weekends and sleep and family time and spent a lot of their life in the last 2 weeks solving this. And so those guys need a shout out. That's an underappreciated role. A lot of times it's the frontline guys running around with keyboards and mouse spooting into safe mode. Long, long days. Go give those guys a hug and tell them thank you. So
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. And, to all of our listeners, and all five of them, right? You said last word. Thanks, Mom. But
exactly.
just want to say thank you to everyone for listening as we're starting to grow this thing and kick it off. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, leave comments wherever you can. I know we're on all the different areas. So we're on Google, we're on, different streaming apps. We have Apple, we have Spotify. We got them going. So if you can, subscribe, like, do what you can to keep us going. And we will be back next week. Have a great time.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.